I'm Dewi Fortuna Anwar. I'm a research professor at the Indonesian Institute of Sciences in Jakarta, Indonesia. And I'm a governing board member of SIPRI. There are so many fronts that one is very worried at the moment. There are concerns about rising extremism and terrorism is still top of the world agenda now. This is not just an issue in the Middle East. Where I come from Indonesia, we are also very concerned about rising extremism and threats of terrorism. But at the same time, we are now faced with global uncertainty. We are not sure what the international order is about, whether we are faced with international disorder. What is happening in terms of the rise of narrow nationalism and populism, like the recent happening in the United States and also elsewhere, even in Europe, where for a long time we are comfortable with the idea of the US being a champion of democracy, of global openness, of a rule-based international system. And now at the moment, we are not sure whether that kind of assurance would still be there. Then for us coming from Asia, we are also faced with both the challenges and opportunities of a rising China. China is now a major player, both globally but even more the regional arena. China is very attractive as a new economic power. But also it is a rising military power. And given the fact that there are concerns like the disputes in the South China Sea, there are concerns, real concerns about whether we could handle the conflict peacefully, whether China will remain peaceful after it has risen. This is some of the big questions that we have not really answered. And for the fact that the world is now very much globally integrated, a crisis in one part of the world very quickly spills over into another part. And from Indonesia, where our democracy is still very new, we have in the past been very much assisted by the international community in ensuring that our democracy continues in the right track, that we can consolidate our democracy. But at times when many countries in the West are faced with threats of religious extremism or fears about immigration and so on, now there are concerns that security trumps democratic concerns. We are not very sure whether commitment to civil society and democracy and openness will continue to be major priorities of developed nations, whether they will continue to offer assistance to countries that are emerging as democracies. And at a time when the middle ground, the moderate people are being increasingly marginalized, we need to be sure that the current and future narrative will be that it will not be the extremists who will be writing our history. And for this, we need international cooperation, and we are not very sure whether the ecosystem at the moment is really very conducive to that more inclusive international dialogue and participation. So, there are many areas of concerns. For example, in terms of dealing with violent extremism or particularly, related to Islam and so on, it is very, very important not to put an entire civilization, entire religion on the defensive. The articulations in the Western countries in particular need to be changed, because most of the people who are under threats from religious extremism are Muslim societies. Many more people are being killed in Muslim countries by Muslim extremists. So Muslim societies are in the same boat. But when the narrative in the West tries to portray that, this is Islam versus the West and so on, it puts the moderates in a very difficult position. Therefore, I think we need to be very, very clear that the enemies are those who are violating religions, those who are intolerant, and the criminals in a way. Do not put do not use a paintbrush to stigmatize an entire religion and an entire civilization. I'm always very optimistic. Precisely sometimes when things look very dark, humanity with instincts for survival, we tend to be able to pull back together. So when we can see that what's happening in Europe, that some reasonable leaders are being elected, France seems to have averted a major disaster. So hopefully, the concerns that populism and narrow nationalism will triumph will not become a reality. But at the same time, I think that given that the world order as we know it is very much in a flux. So the established powers need to be able also to come to terms with the fact that it will no longer enjoy the monopoly of wealth, and it will no longer enjoy the monopoly of writing the rules of the international system. And I think the international system needs to be able to come to terms with that. Otherwise, we will have this inevitable conflict between resident power or incumbent power and rising powers, particularly in East Asia.